For almost 3 years, Myanmar has been racked by an increasingly brutal conflict sparked by the military's overthrow of the country's democratic government. However, there are signs that the situation may now be at a turning point. In late October 2023, an alliance of rebel forces launched a major new offensive, seizing large swathes of territory. So, could this now mark the beginning of the end of the Burmese civil war? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Kerr-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. We often think of civil wars in relatively simple terms. The government of a country versus a single defined rebel group. But of course, in the real world, they're rarely like that. Instead, they tend to be highly complex affairs. Rather than a binary conflict between two sides, they can often pit a wide range of internal and external actors against each other. One of the best examples is Myanmar. On the surface, it's widely seen as a battle between the military and pro-democracy forces. However, things are far more complex than this. There's another layer to the situation. The conflict also incorporates an 80-year insurgency between the state and an array of ethnic militias. Indeed, and arguably, the Burmese Civil War is the most complicated and protracted civil war in the world. The Republic of the Union of Myanmar, often known by its original name, Burma, lies in Southeast Asia. With the Indian Ocean to its west, its neighbours include Bangladesh and India to its northwest, China to its north and northeast, and Laos and Thailand to its east and south. At 680,000 square kilometres or 260,000 square miles, it's the world's 39th largest country. Its population is around 55 million and is highly diverse. Indeed, it's estimated that the country is home to over 100 ethno-linguistic and religious communities. The largest are the Bamar, also known as the Burmans. Predominantly Buddhist, they're about half the population and live mainly in the central parts of the country. On top of this, there are many other significant groups. These include the largely Christian Karen and the Buddhist Mon in the country's south, the Thai-speaking Shan and the Chinese-speaking Wa in the east, the predominantly Christian Chin, the Buddhist Rakhine and the Muslim Rohingya in the west, and the mainly Christian Kachin up in the north. The country has a long and rich history, with the first Burmese kingdom emerging almost 1,000 years ago. However, for our purposes, the story really starts with Britain's imperial conquest of Burma during the 19th century. Originally incorporated into British India, it became a separate crown colony in 1937. By the start of the Second World War, just a few years later, pressure was growing to end colonial rule, and in 1942 Japanese forces invaded with the assistance of the anti-imperial Burma Independence Army. However, this alliance quickly broke down and the BIA joined with other groups to form the Anti-Fascist People's Freedom League, the AFPFL, under the leadership of General Aung San. And while imperial rule was re-established at the war's end, Britain soon agreed to grant the country independence alongside neighbouring India and Pakistan. From the start, the country faced severe instability. While still under British rule, Aung San, who was serving as Prime Minister and seen as the father of the nation, was assassinated by political rivals. Meanwhile, the first major ethnic insurgency broke out when the Karen launched a rebellion. This continued even after independence on the 4th of January 1948. Although the constitution of the new Union of Burma explicitly accepted a right of secession after 10 years, the ethnic tensions continued. Faced with these challenges, the armed forces, which had emerged from the wartime BIA, came to see themselves as the defenders of the new state's unity and sovereignty. The army's first foray into politics would come a decade later, in October 1958, when the ruling AFPFL split. As the country faced a political crisis, the military established a caretaker government under the Armed Forces Chief of Staff, General Ne Win. But while democratic elections were held a little over a year later, Ne Win seized power again in March 1962. Avowedly Marxist, Ne Win now transformed Burma into a highly repressive, one-party military state. This in turn fed various ethnic insurgencies around the country. As a result, by the 1970s, a wide variety of ethnic opposition groups had emerged, often with insurgent military wings. These included the Kachin Independence Army, the Karen National Liberation Army, the Karenni Liberation Army, the Mon National Defence Organisation, the Shan State Army, and the Wa National Army, to name just a few. By the middle of the 1980s, pressure for change was growing. After 2 decades of repression, conflict, and poor economic management, Burma had become one of the poorest countries in the world. This all came to a head in 1988 when widespread protests erupted and Ne Win was eventually forced to step down after 26 years in power. But instead of a return to democracy, a new military body took over, the State Law and Order Restoration Council, SLORC. Although the SLORC came down hard on any opposition to its rule, it nevertheless allowed elections to be held in May 1990. However, there'd been no return to democracy. Refusing to accept the victory of the opposition National League for Democracy, the NLD, co-founded by Aung San Suu Kyi, the daughter of General Aung San, it announced that it would remain in power to preserve the country's unity, solidarity and sovereignty. While the decision was widely condemned internationally and Aung San Suu Kyi, now under house arrest, was awarded the 1991 Nobel Peace Prize, the SLORC refused to give up control. Instead, it stepped up its repression. As well as targeting democratic opposition to its rule, it also launched a fresh campaign against the country's ethnic insurgencies, which had by now significantly proliferated as factionalism had led to various new splinter groups. As a result, Burma, which the military regime now renamed Myanmar, sank into further violence. But over the years that followed, the military steadily managed to reassert control over large parts of the country, either by force or through ceasefires with local groups. Meanwhile, parts of the country, such as Shan, descended into criminality as groups used drug production to fund their activities. Over the next decade and a half, calls for change continued, both at home and abroad, and in 2008 the military responded by unveiling a new, supposedly democratic constitution. This was designed to ensure that it would remain central to the country's politics by granting it a quarter of the seats in parliament and reserving key ministries for military appointees. 2 years later, on the 7th of November 2010, Burmese voters went to the polls for the first time in 3 decades. However, the NLD chose to boycott the election after Aung San Suu Kyi was barred from standing. Instead, the Union Solidarity and Development Party, the USDP, a front for the armed forces, won the elections. But while the NLD and insurgent groups rejected the results, the elections were nevertheless considered an essential first step towards democracy. This was seemingly proven when the next elections in 2015 were overwhelmingly won by the NLD. Although Aung San Suu Kyi was prevented from becoming president due to her marriage to a foreign citizen, she nevertheless assumed the role of state councillor, effectively becoming Myanmar's prime minister. While all this seemed to be grounds for optimism concerning the restoration of democracy, hopes that it might lead to a new approach to the ethnic insurgencies were premature. The NLD showed little interest in creating a federal system, a key demand of many ethnic groups, arguing that the military was preventing it from doing so. More to the point, the government, including Aung San Suu Kyi, came under widespread international condemnation for defending the military's brutal treatment of many ethnic minorities, including the Rohingya. To many observers, this highlighted that pro-democracy sentiment didn't extend to national minorities. Instead, it was closely aligned with majoritarian ethnic Burmese nationalism. But despite the apparent alignment between the military and the NLD, hopes that Myanmar was now firmly back in the democratic camp proved to be premature. In November 2020, the NLD won another resounding victory in the latest national elections. However, with the USDP complaining about widespread fraud, despite reports from observers that the vote was essentially free and fair, the military stepped in again. On the 1st of February 2021, it announced a one-year state of emergency and handed power to the Armed Forces Chief. Meanwhile, Aung San Suu Kyi and many of the country's other political leaders were placed under house arrest. The new military takeover immediately led to widespread popular protests. But as the months passed, opposition to the regime became steadily more organised. This led to the creation of the National Unity Government and its military wing, the People's Defence Force, the PDF. Meanwhile, as the military regime cracked down on any and all dissent, arresting and torturing many thousands of pro-democracy protesters, many of the ethnic rebel groups again stepped up their attacks. At the same time, some began to align with the National Unity Government, which now proclaimed that as well as wanting to overthrow the military junta, it intended to restructure Myanmar as a federation. Crucially, however, several key rebel groups remained detached from the resistance. This included the so-called Three Brotherhood Alliance, made up of the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, based in the predominantly Chinese Kokang region in northern Shan, the Tang National Liberation Army, also based in Shan, and the Arakan Army, over in the west of the country, which had previously reached a ceasefire agreement with the military. However, this all changed on the 27th of October, when the groups launched a major coordinated attack against the regime's forces, an offensive known as Operation 1027. Since then, the alliance has made significant headway, capturing large swathes of territory. While regime forces have hastily retreated in some areas, there have also been reports of mass surrenders and defections. Moreover, its success also appears to have reinvigorated other ethnic rebel groups. Since the launch of Operation 1027, growing numbers of attacks have been reported across the country. More to the point, and crucially, neighbouring China also appears to have thrown its support behind the alliance, which is also fighting organised crime gangs based along the Chinese border. In recent years, Beijing has become increasingly alarmed at a growing internet scam industry that's seen well over 100,000 Chinese nationals trafficked into Myanmar. Naturally, all this has given hope that the military regime may now be finally facing defeat. Certainly, many observers believe this represents the most severe threat to the armed forces in decades. But while the offensive has certainly taken a toll, there's still good reason for caution. Reports suggest that the military is already adjusting its tactics to take on the insurgents, and there are also suggestions about a mass mobilisation if insurgent forces move closer to the capital and other major cities. But even if the resistance wins, and there have already been political talks held under Indonesian auspices to end the conflict, it won't necessarily end the war. While many think that the conflict in Burma is about pro-democracy groups fighting against a repressive military regime, it's far more complex than this. The civil war is based on a far more profound and longer-running conflict that's seen the country's various ethnic groups fighting for autonomy and independence for almost 80 years. In this sense, even if the military is defeated and democracy restored, it will just end one aspect of the country's problems. Myanmar will still face the enormous task of ending what is effectively the world's longest-running civil war. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.